Dr. Lyra Venn sat cross-legged beneath the crimson canopy of Thraxis Prime's jungle, her datapad glowing softly in her lap. The xenobiologist had been stationed at the remote research outpost for 6 months now, studying the apex predators of this wild world, the Thraxians. Towering 6-limbed creatures with obsidian scales and intelligent amber eyes, they were fearsome hunters who ruled the forest with calculated precision. What the mission briefing hadn't mentioned was how curious their young could be. It started 3 weeks ago. Lyra had been reading her digital library during a field observation, completely absorbed in an old Earth novel, when she noticed movement in her peripheral vision. A Thraxian cub, no larger than a German shepherd but infinitely more dangerous, had crept within 5 meters of her position. Its parents watched from the shadows, protective but not aggressive. The cub tilted its head, studying her with those impossibly bright eyes. Lyra remained still, barely breathing. Then the cub did something unexpected. It sat down, mimicking her posture with eerie accuracy, and simply watched her read. She named him Rekai, after the double moons that hung in Thraxis Prime's sky. Now, Rekai was no longer alone. 3 more cubs had joined what Lyra privately called her reading circle. They would emerge from the undergrowth each afternoon, settle around her at a respectful distance, and observe with rapt attention as she scrolled through texts, scientific journals, or personal logs. But today was different. Rekai approached with something clenched in his smallest pair of forelimbs, a jagged piece of meteorite, still warm from atmospheric entry. He deposited it carefully beside Lyra's datapad, then sat back on his haunches with an expectant chirp. Lyra stared at the object, then at Rekai. "Did you bring this for me to study?" The cub's tail swished. His siblings emerged from the foliage, each carrying their own treasures. One dragged a peculiar bioluminescent fungus. Another presented a crystalline insect preserved in amber-like resin. The smallest cub dropped a feather from a sky predator at her feet, then sneezed proudly. Lyra's heart melted even as her scientific mind raced. "You're bringing me specimens." She picked up the meteorite carefully, turning it over in her hands while narrating her observations aloud, a habit from her university teaching days. Fascinating. Chondrite composition, possibly carbonaceous. The surface oxidation suggests it's been on the ground for less than a week. Rekai's pupils dilated with what could only be described as excitement. He chirped rapidly and the other cubs pressed closer. Understanding dawned on Lyra like a sunrise. They weren't just watching her read, they were learning to learn. The Thraxians had always been known for their intelligence, but this was something else entirely. These cubs had observed her studying objects, analyzing them, recording data. Now they wanted to participate. "All right," Lyra said, activating her datapad scanner. "Let's do this properly." She began cataloging each item with theatrical precision, explaining her methodology in simple terms. The cubs watched with laser focus as she recorded measurements, took spectral analyses, and documented findings. When she verbally noted the fungus's unique triple helix DNA structure, Rekai actually purred, a sound that made the trees around them seem to vibrate. Over the following weeks, the phenomenon intensified. Word spread through the cub population, somehow, and Lyra's reading sessions transformed into impromptu field seminars attended by a dozen young Thraxians. They brought everything: rare minerals, unusual plant samples, the skull of an unknown micro-predator, even what appeared to be pre-Thraxian artifacts from buried ruins. The adult Thraxians observed from the perimeter, initially wary but increasingly tolerant. Lyra suspected they recognized that this strange human posed no threat. In fact, she might be educating their offspring in ways their species had never conceived. One afternoon, Rekai arrived with something that made Lyra's breath catch. It was a piece of advanced technology, clearly not Thraxian and definitely not human. The metallic fragment bore inscriptions in an unknown language and hummed with residual energy. "Rekai, where did you find this?" Lyra whispered, scanning it carefully. The cub gestured with his snout toward the deep jungle, the forbidden zone her superiors had marked as unexplored territory, evidence of a previous civilization. This changed everything. Lyra immediately transmitted her findings to the outpost. Within hours, the lead researchers arrived, astonished by both the artifact and the scene before them. A human woman surrounded by predator cubs, conducting an impromptu xenoarchaeology lesson while her students chirped questions and brought supplementary materials from hidden caches. Dr. Harmon, her supervisor, approached slowly. "Lyra, do you realize what you've done?" "Made friends?" she offered weakly. "You've established first contact protocol with a pre-industrial species by teaching them the scientific method," Harmon said, his voice a mixture of awe and exasperation. "Command is going to have a fit. Ethics board will debate this for years." Rekai chose that moment to drop another artifact at Lyra's feet. This one clearly a data storage device. He looked up at her with those intelligent amber eyes and made a soft, questioning sound. Lyra smiled and picked up her scanner. "It's all right, Harmon. They're not pre-industrial anymore." She addressed Rekai directly. "Let's see what information this contains, shall we?" As the sun set over Thraxis Prime, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, Lyra Venn continued her lesson. The predator cubs clustered closer, absorbing every word with hunger that had nothing to do with hunting. They had discovered something more satisfying than prey: knowledge. And they had learned it from observing a human doing the most human thing possible: reading, studying, and sharing what she learned with anyone curious enough to listen. Even if those listeners had claws that could shred steel and ancestors who had ruled this planet for millennia. After all, humanity's greatest strength had never been its weapons or technology. It was the insatiable curiosity that drove humans to read beneath alien skies, and the generous impulse to teach anyone, anything, willing to learn. Rekai purred again, and in that sound, Lyra heard the future: a partnership between species, built not on dominance or fear, but on the universal language of discovery.